We're going to go through the journey of CII and essentially what you need to consider on your way through, where you want to get to. This image here is one of our infographics. So we have several ways that we try and break down for people how to simplify the process of how to get from A to B to C to D all the way through your CII process. The reason we have these is because it is quite complicated. So if you find yourself looking at the CII website and trying to work out what modules you need to do in what order and finding that it's not that straightforward, you are really not on your own. And that is why we spend so much time creating these types of resources and why we're going to break it down for you. So when we look at going through your CII, you're going to have essentially your goals, and those might be short-term goals and long-term goals that you're working towards. So what I'm going to do is take these one stage at a time, give you some pointers in terms of the modules you want to think about, how you'll be tested, what you'll be assessed on for each of those levels, and also any tips that might help you for completing that level as well. And we'll take this through with certificate first, then diploma, advanced diploma. Like I said, and for those of you just coming in as well, drop your questions into the chat box or take yourself off mute if you want to pick up on anything that I'm saying. Grace is here as well. Those of you who have access to our online app, you will know Grace's face and voice from lots of our videos in there too. So she's here to help with any questions as well. So firstly, when we look at doing your certificate is essentially about the same as doing an A-level in terms of academic level. And it consists of 3 multiple choice exams. There's one big thing that will generally influence what you do when doing your certificate, and that tends to be whether you work in the London market or not. So if you work in the London market, you're probably going to look towards doing what we call your LM exams. LM stands for London Market. So we have London Market 1, 2, and 3. So if we look at these in terms of the map, these are the ones over here. Now, the thing about doing the London Market exams is they are specifically to do with particularly the subscription market and some considerations that come with working with specialty risk and then the Lloyd's market. LM1 and LM2 do actually have a fair bit of crossover together. So one tip I would give you if you're looking into this section is to do LM1 and LM2 reasonably close together. So I'd usually suggest as soon as you pass LM1 that you get your LM2 booked, and you try and do that within ideally about 6 to 8 weeks, so that all of that content you've learnt and remembered through your LM1 is still fresh in your mind to go on to LM2. LM2 will absolutely add to that content. There is lots of new content in there. Some of the questions you get in LM2 you might have actually seen in your LM1 as well. And then we have LM3, which has a smaller amount of crossover. It's not as much between LM1 and LM2, but the book itself is quite specific in the areas it addresses, essentially picks up some of the gaps, some of the questions that you might be left with after doing LM1 and LM2. So it makes sense to do those 3 together. And the alternative to that, those of you that aren't in the London market or you're looking at the alternative option, is to do your IF1 as your first module. So IF1 is a compulsory unit. So if you do IF1, after that, you have the freedom of choosing whichever modules you want to do at your Cert CII. But let's talk about IF1 first, because IF1 is actually quite a big module. And in fact, it in some ways might be a little unfair in my opinion, shall I say, because as a first impression, this is actually quite a tricky exam. The book's quite long and there's a fair bit of content in there. So if you do find yourself starting on your CII and looking at IF1 and feeling as though it's quite tricky, just bear in mind that actually once you've done that one, that's probably the hardest certificate module that you are going to do. The other 2 you'll probably find substantially easier. So don't worry if you do find that one tricky. It's not necessarily a fair representation of what's to come. So once that one is done, IF1, you get to choose 2 others. And the joy of certificate is there is quite a lot of choice. Where I say the joy, it's also the pain, because sometimes this is the challenge to try and work out what you should be doing. Now, generally speaking, I think Grace agrees with me in this one. We've spoken about this before. We generally say IF1 and then IF3. IF3 is a good second option. Once you've done that, your third option is worth choosing one that is closest to your role. So if you work in claims, you might want to do the claims module, IF4. Or if you are broken, then you might want to do I10. So you can choose there the module that's going to be closest fit to what you are doing. Okay. Or if you find it hard to select one, you want to pick one, then you might find that your interests align to certain modules. So for example, I like IF9. Okay? IF9 because it's more focused around behaviours and customers, so I find that more interesting. So you might be able to find a module there that actually just aligns to things you want to read about. So timeframes for both of these, generally as a good guide to yourself, I would recommend trying to get through those 3 modules in good momentum. Okay, so allowing yourself a little bit of a break, maybe to celebrate at the end of it, a weekend off, but getting back into it as soon as you can, because actually revising becomes something you need to plan into your life, and it becomes a bit of a habit. So when you break that, you're going to find yourself going back into it again. So if any of you are better at going to the gym than me, you'll know that if you haven't been for a week, it's a lot harder to motivate yourself when you finally go back. And it's the same with your revision. So we don't want to afford ourselves those long breaks, because then we're going to find it harder to motivate ourselves back on it. So if we assume we're doing it in that succession, then generally you're going to be looking around 6 months in a time frame to do it. Anyone that's joining the market on a kind of structured program, particularly if you are a graduate and you've just come out of education, you might find yourself doing that a fair bit quicker, because you're used to doing exams, you're used to revising, and therefore it might be good to give yourself a target of about 4 to 6 months to try and get through that certificate one. If it takes you longer, that's absolutely fine. These are just guidelines, because I know people sometimes like to have something to work towards. There's no need to go at a certain pace. Just might find that it takes more time per module if you have longer gaps within it. So we're looking at hitting 40 credits. So you can see in the image, we have our little stack of tokens. So 40 credits is the magic number we want for certificate. And that's the same for whether we're going with the IF1 or the LM1 option. One thing to bear in mind, and this does have an influence on all levels, that's prior learning credits. So if you have done a degree in a module subject that has some overlap, and that would generally be some kind of business degree or legal degree, then you will likely find you get given some credits from the CII. And those can be credits, what we call unassigned, which basically means there's not any specific module this is the same as, but we think there's enough crossover to just give you some credits. Or they can be assigned to a module. So say, for example, 530, your economics and business, that's quite a common one. You might not have to do that module, you'll get the credits anyway, because most of what's in that book is actually covered from your degree. You may also find that from any accountancy qualifications, any professional qualifications you've done. So if you think you might have a chance for some, it's worth applying. And if you get those credits, generally speaking, you'll get 25 or more. It's often that you'll end up with a 1 or 2 modules at least as your credits. So once you've done that, you might find that as soon as you've done IF1, you've actually got your certificate. So your credits that you've been given as unassigned credits will count towards the lower ones. The reason this works, and the thing to kind of consider as we work all the way through these modules, is credits drop down. So with CII, you'll look for your credits as certificate, a diploma and advanced diploma, and there'll be credit requirements for you at every level. But if you get credits at a higher level, they essentially trump that level, they count towards it. So although here we're looking at 40 credits at certificate, if you do have credits at diploma or advanced diploma, those will count towards it as well. You just have to make sure you get the compulsory unit at that level to get that award. So has anyone got any questions on certificate before I move on to diploma? Just keeping an eye on the chat box there. Otherwise, Grace, have you got any common questions people ask that I haven't covered there you want to chuck in? Okay, just realised what I haven't covered very clearly. And that is the assessment method. So for certificate, it's multiple choice exams. So whichever module you're doing, you will be sitting a multiple choice exam. Some of them have slightly different structures. So some of them are just simply question and then your optional answers. Others use scenarios. So scenarios will give you almost a case study, like a story of something that's going on. And then once you've done that story, you'll get the questions that align to it. So these ones tend to come up, for example, they come up in LM2. One of our top tips is to do these questions first when it comes to your exam paper. So these are often bigger questions, require a little bit more thought, so it's worth thinking about those at the beginning when you're most energized starting your exam. But other than that, it's always going to be multiple choice. And the joy about multiple choice is practice really does help. There are only so many questions that can be written around these papers. So if you do go through and do practice questions on the exam guides in the CII, there are ones on Revision Mate, albeit they're to test your knowledge. They're not necessarily at the same level you'll find the questions are written at for your exam. And also if you're on our online course, you'll find extra questions in every chapter in there as well. So the more times you practice these questions, the better for your support. So do you have to do LM3 if you're doing LM1 and LM2? No, you don't. So you might find actually a person who's written this question, I know you work in claims. So you might want to do LM1, LM2, and then go on to do IF4. And that might have more sense for you in terms of what you are learning relating to your job role. Once you've done those 3 modules, it's not the end of your certificate. So don't feel as though it's a big decision on which ones you're not going to do, because we'll cover this once we get to the final stage. But right at the end of your ACII, it's very likely you'll go back and do a couple more modules to top up your credits. So you don't worry too much about which third option you do, because you can come back and do more later on. Okay, let's move on to diploma. So as we look at your diploma, here we're starting to look more about your understanding of the book and applying it into a bit of context. So here we see your questions are going to be, your exams are going to be a mixture of multiple choice exam and coursework. So the coursework is there to make sure that you are understanding the book and you're answering questions in longer answers in your own words to make sure you've understood that theory and at times applied it to different scenarios. And then the exam is there to just test your knowledge. And again, multiple choice questions coming through as the theme for those. Now, there is a bit of a jump between certificate and diploma in terms of sometimes even the size of the book, but certainly the level of knowledge that you'll need and how much you might need to prepare in order to digest the information. So I'd say when you move on to these ones, you want to make sure that you are just allowing yourself that extra time to go through. The coursework is actually a brilliant way of revising. Ideally, you're going to enroll and you're going to do your coursework questions, and then you'll do your revision, and then you'll do your exam. What tends to happen is that people book their exam, and then sometimes through maybe lack of motivation to do the coursework, they end up doing the coursework afterwards. So I really encourage you to discipline yourself to do that coursework first. The reason for that is the coursework does require you to pull lots of information out of the book. So once you've got through a few questions, it does feel like it keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. So I totally sympathize and remember what that is like. Just remember that all the time you're doing it, you're not just doing it for coursework, you are also doing it to learn and help you prepare for the exam. Absolutely will help you. We are going to do a session, one of these webinars is just on diploma coursework. So we will focus more on that when we get to that webinar. And then you'll have the exam as well. And again, we're doing a section just on that, just for how to, some tips for you specialising in those questions. But the modules and the things we want to consider when we're moving into diploma. So the first module that we talk about, and also the first module we suggest you do actually, is MO5. MO5 is the law module. And MO5, poor thing, has a terrible reputation. It's the one that most people are worried about doing. And you know, there is a lot of new information when it comes to this book, albeit I don't think its reputation is fair. I do think there are harder modules. The reason I think behind this is because there's just a lot of cases for you to remember. And the idea of remembering cases can be quite intimidating if that's not something you've done before. The thing about cases is what they actually are stories. And our brains are much better at remembering stories than they are facts. So, for example, if I ask you to tell me about Titanic and what happened with Titanic, you no doubt can tell me all kinds of very specific pieces of information about the band that were playing until the end, about who got on the boats first, about people coming back to pick people up. All of these specific information you can remember because you've watched the film, you've read this, you've listened to the story, essentially. Whereas if I gave you a piece of paper explaining the Titanic, it's much harder to remember that. So when we look at doing the cases, it's good to go in with that frame of mind. You're going to remember these, not all of them, of course, but you are going to remember a lot more of these than you probably expect when you first start off with the book. The more you can visualize them as stories, the more you can almost animate in your mind or look at visuals that will bring those to life, the better for you with that. And once that law exam is done and out of the way, a lot of the content comes up over and again in other modules. Because really law is the foundation of what we are doing in insurance. It explains the why behind what we are doing. And it tests all of the rules and processes that we have. So once you've done that module, it's going to be really helpful for you carrying on. So we recommend you get that one done first. And then you have a choice, still another compulsory choice, but that's essentially a choice around which business module you're going to do. So we have here M92, which is business and finance at diploma level. So M stands for mixed assessment. So the mixed assessment of coursework and exams. Or we have 530. And whenever we have just 3 numbers, we know that's coming from advanced diploma. That's economics and business. So the two have a fair bit of overlap. That's why they have to do one. They want you to do something to do with business. Make sure you've got that business understanding, that commercial awareness. Here's what I think is a nice joy is that you can actually do both. So there is a fair bit of crossover between the two. So you might find that actually it's worth doing M92 and then straight away you do 530 because what you've learned in M92 is going to help you with that 530 module. But if you don't enjoy business, then of course you can just pick one. Your choice of which one to pick is going to be up to you, depending on whether you are enjoying the exams or whether you want to move on straight onto coursework. Bear in mind, if you go onto your ACII, you are going to do lots of coursework. So you might want to do one more diploma module here and then mix it up a little bit with your coursework. Once you get to this stage, you've done 2 modules here. So let's say for this sake, you've done MO5 and you've done M92. You then can do 2 more modules at diploma. This is the really important line, or above. So what we often see is that people will focus on doing 4 diploma modules. And what this means is it restricts you later down your ACII journey. What I would encourage you to do is do these 2 modules, potentially do a 3rd at diploma level because there are some that are very specific to job roles that really might help you. For example, within your line of business or within underwriting and claims are broken. Those ones are really good to do. Once you've done that one, I would recommend doing your final module as an advanced diploma 1, which is pure coursework. And that allows you to choose between a whole range of modules. And what you'll find at that stage is that you'll have an opinion as to whether you prefer the coursework or the exams. And then once you have your opinion on how you learn the best, you can use that flexibility when you get to the end of your journey. So however we're doing this, we are looking at getting 120 credits in total. This includes the 40 credits you already have at certificate. So the thing that we want to really look at, assuming we've got the certificate in the bag, is this 90 credits at diploma level or above, which you're going to get from 4 different modules. Now, how long does the diploma take? This was where we start getting a little bit wider in terms of timeframes, depending on how much time you can allocate to this, your home commitments, how long out of studying you are. Generally, I would recommend to give yourself a target of trying to do one module every quarter. That is a fairly ambitious target. It's one that will give you some momentum. So if you don't keep to that, don't worry, but try and keep to something long, have something to aim to, because then if you go over it, then at least you're still moving towards a reasonable pace with it. But we can sometimes see people spending 6 months on one module or longer, depending on what's going on for you at that time. One thing I'd really encourage you to try and do is use the momentum to do the coursework and then do the exam soon after. Again, just like when I talked about LM1 and LM2, you don't want to be doing the coursework and then having a long break before you do the exam, because all of that work is going to help you. So try and avoid rewarding yourself with a break after doing the coursework. Okay? Instead, you want to try and finish that coursework, book that exam in as soon as you can. Once that exam is booked, you have a date to be working towards. Any questions on the diploma one, pop them into the chat box. And Grace, anything to add from you?
I don't think so, just exactly that. So if you can, try and do the coursework and then, as Sam said, keep the momentum going for the multiple choice.
Okay, I think I'll keep an eye on that chat box if anyone is still writing a question, but let's move on to Advanced Diploma in the meantime. So Advanced Diploma, ACII, which is essentially where we are completing the qualification, albeit we have the fellowship option to go on to a few years later down the line, but we won't be worrying about that today. So ACII, got a question here. With a law degree, is MO5 exempt? Generally, yes. There are some exemptions, some rules in terms of how recently you did it, which I know for you was quite recent, and also where you studied it. So because it's based on UK law, so you can do your form, you'll get that exemption. Just put in an exemption form, because you've certainly going to get that coming through for what you studied there. So you'll find you'll get MO5 exempt. You might even find you get some unassigned credits as well with it. So definitely pop that form in. It's called the prior learning form. I reckon Grace is finding the link and putting it in the chat box for you. There she goes. Yeah. Okay. So ACII level, this is when we switch to coursework. And this is very different to what you'd have done in the other parts of your CII. Sometimes students feedback that they don't feel like they're being tested on their knowledge, they're being tested on their memory. And that's reasonably fair, actually, at certificate and diploma level, because there is a lot to remember, and those questions are going to be coming up then in your exam. Whereas when we get to advanced diploma, it is quite different. It's here about applying your knowledge. So here they want to hear your opinion. They want to hear your thoughts, your suggestions, recommendations. So you do have a lot more freedom, and you can really use this to learn more about your organisation. So I know from my perspective, I finished off with one of these modules as a coursework module, and I got so much from it, because I was going around the business, asking people questions, looking through the intranet site, and essentially learning what was in the book, but how that worked in my organisation. So much more impactful, and also quite enjoyable, because you have a little bit more autonomy over how you're going to approach that question. So for advanced diploma, we're looking at 5 modules at this ACII level. Now, you have one compulsory, but a bigger choice here. The choice here is between 530, 820 and 960, which in normal language is underwriting, claims and broking. So what the CII are looking for is that you've done one technical module about really fundamentals of insurance. So you pick your module that you're going to do as a compulsory one, and then your other 4 are optional. You can do all of those. This isn't a selection between. You can certainly use all of them. So you might want to pick an underwriting one, because that's mostly what your role is. Chances are, if that's your role, you're going to benefit from doing the claims one as well. Absolutely. And you might just be intrigued to do the broking one, because you're dealing with brokers every day. So feel free to do all 3. There is then a lot more choice. You have things like marketing, Personally, I find that one really interesting, particularly because we often see adverts on TV and so on for insurance companies. Gives us a much better understanding of what's going on behind that. More strategic options, a lot more risk management options. So you have a broader selection. I'm going to share with you a spreadsheet shortly on all of these different options and how they all come together. But really, you're best off at this stage selecting things you're interested in, because you're going to be writing 3 essays for each module. There's a lot of writing. So you want to pick something you're intrigued to be learning about. You don't need to decide in advance which modules you're going to do. I'd recommend that you just decide a bit of an outline, just a penciled sketch of the modules you might do. And then as you tick each one off, then you can decide which one you're going to go into next. In terms of sign off within your organisation, I know sometimes you have to outline and confirm which ones you're going to do first. So if you're not certain, I would still recommend that you just put in that you're going to do a module at that level. The cost will be consistent, and just let your manager know that you might change between one or another module. Don't let that put you off signing up or putting that request in advance. So that's essentially 150 credits by the time you've got 5 of those. This is where our chips are here. So you've got 150 credits here, advanced diploma level. And what we actually need is 290 all in all. So if we've got 150 from advanced diploma, we've got 40 from our Cert CII. So that's 190, plus we've probably done MO5 and M92, so that's another 50 credits. We're on about 240, give or take, depending on which modules you've done. You then need about another 45 to 50 credits. And those credits can come from wherever you like, so long as you've hit your 205 credits at advanced diploma level and diploma level. So at this stage, this is where you're getting a little bit more specific and a bit more mathematical about which options you're going to do. So you're probably going to find, depending on whether or not you did that 3rd diploma module, that you want to go back and do one more diploma module, you want to do one more coursework module, and you'll go back and do a couple more certificate modules to finish off your final credits. So as you get to this later stage, this is where you might find yourself going back and doing LM3, for example, because you didn't do that one on the way up. And at this point, you're probably going to find them quite a bit easier because you've done quite a lot more learning around the subjects as well. So let me just see if you've got any questions here before I share with you my spreadsheet. That infographic on there as well, that's actually just on the homepage on our website. Lily, you want to chuck the website address in the chat box? You can just go straight in and download that, have a copy for yourself there. And then we also have this spreadsheet, which is a very popular option that we have for people. So like I say, and for those of you that came in after I started, working your way through all of the credits and all of the modules is challenging. It's one of the hardest parts of your CII, which is why we spend so much time trying to simplify it in different ways. And the spreadsheet is one of our most popular ways. This is available for anyone. Anyone can ask us for the spreadsheet. We'll happily share it with everyone. So what we do here is essentially give you a bit of a framework, and you can tick off the modules you've done. So let's say you've decided to go for IF1. So we say yes, and then it's going to pick up your 15 credits that you've got for it. Let's say you then did IF3 and we did IF4. So that in itself is 45 credits. You can see that here. So 45 credits is over the requirement of 40 credits, and that means your certificate is complete. So if we then go on to look at doing your diploma, what you'll probably find is you do the law and you do the M92. These are in bold because they are compulsory but we're highlighting them to use ones to do. And then you're at 50 credits and you're going to need 90 credits at diploma level or above. So let's say we follow through what I suggested as you went through, and we decide to do an underwriting option and then go on to do 530. And if you look back now at the diploma option, we can see that diploma is complete, even though you've only got 70 credits here, because you've got credits in your advanced diploma one here, those credits are dropping down, so you're on your way. So we know now that we want advanced diploma, and that's going to require us to do at least one of these options in bold. So again, let's stick with the underwriting theme. Okay, we need to do 5 of these altogether. So we've got advanced underwriting, we've already done 530. Let's say we want to do claims as well. And then we'll pick some of my favorite ones. I really like 990 and I really like 945. And let's go 995. So we've now got 6 of these ticked. Let's go back one. 5 of these ticked. So we've got 5 of these ticked. So we've got the 150, but you can see that we have got incomplete coming up here. And the reason we've got incomplete is because we haven't hit our targets. So we've hit our target of 150 at advanced diploma level, but we also need 205 at advanced diploma level plus diploma level. So we've got 150 and 70. So we've got 220, so we've got that one. So what are we missing? 290 credits overall. So we've got 45 credits over here at certificate. So 150 plus 70, so 220 plus 45, so 265. So we need one more module, quick maths. One more module, so we're going to go for one of my favorite ones. I have 9, yes. And oh, there we go. We are now complete. There's 2 more modules, bad maths. So we need, 290 credits overall between all of the 3, 150 at advanced diploma, including these compulsory ones ticked off, and 205 between this one and this one. So we can send out this spreadsheet for you, and then you'll have an update. So we've got a question coming in here. Do the CII keep track of our credits? Do we have to submit the diploma and advanced diploma modules? Which we have credits for. They are really good at this. They actually will send you learning statements. So actually every time, you might find this is a bit confusing actually. Whenever you pass an exam, you'll probably get a letter saying you've passed, and then a learning statement letter, and then a letter telling you where you got your marks within your pass, and then a letter for your certificate. So you'll get quite a lot of letters when you pass, particularly if you hit a certain milestone. So they'll send you these learning statements, and these will confirm to you how many credits you have at each level. These are really helpful for anyone who got partway through and stopped their CII years ago and is now about to start again, because some of the old modules and old codes actually still count for things. They're just rebranded. So if you get a learning statement, it's going to tell you what your codes are and what that gives you credits for. So learning statements are absolutely worth keeping on top of for your own kind of awareness of where you are, and just double checking, because as much as this is information we'll share with you now, the CII can change the frameworks, and they do always give you good notice before they do, but equally by the time you've gone through and done 2-3 years that you might spend doing this, it might well have changed. So it is worth keeping an eye on those. Any other questions coming through? You're welcome to ask questions around our opinions on certain modules or anything like that as well. We will always tell you our opinions. That's all they are. They're just opinions. But if you are weighing up between certain modules at the moment, feel free to ask us that.
Sam,
yeah.
It may be worth if you go back to your spreadsheet very briefly, although it's quite small, you might be able to see on there as well that there are things for 50 credits. And so these are dissertations. So you, instead of doing a module which is consisting of 3 different courseworks, you can do a dissertation on, for example, the one that Sam just highlighted, which was the London market insurance specialisation, and then the insurance market specialisation. And then that will bump you up by 50 rather than the normal credits that you would have for a module at 30. So if you are really keen on writing and you love doing a dissertation at uni and you really want to do something like that again, then the option is there for people who don't want to go down the module route.
And just caveat that with not for the faint-hearted.
That too.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of work involved in them, but if you've got a topic that you're particularly interested in, then it can align to that really nicely. So if you're claiming recognition of prior learning, when's the best and most appropriate time? Just as soon as possible. The sooner you have that information, the sooner you can plan what modules you're going to do, give yourself that kind of target and so on. So there's no point delaying. Your qualifications will expire, but you do have a whole 10-year window usually before that expires, but that will often depend on the qualifications you've done. But 10 years tends to be the rule of thumb. So don't panic. You know, if you graduated last year and you haven't applied yet, you've got plenty of time. I would just say there's no point in delaying, because the sooner you've got that information, the better for you. How do you apply? So there's a link that Grace has actually popped up earlier on in the chat box. Just copy and paste that in case anyone, I know some people came in after. So it's just a form, and they'll want a certificate of your qualification, and I think usually a modular breakdown as well. You will often be able to see if you are applying for something that's quite popular amongst CII students. So let's say you are applying because you've done a business degree at Greenwich. You probably aren't going to be the first person that's done a business degree at Greenwich. So you can actually see that information in advance that it's likely to be approved. Whereas if you are pulling across a qualification that's very niche or overseas, international, then you might be the first person to ask for it to be accredited. And that means that you'll have to go through a whole accreditation process, which takes a lot longer, because what they need to do is validate that there is enough of your content the same as the CII's content, which reasons that you don't need to do that module. So yeah, it's worth doing it quite quickly. Doesn't matter around what your result is. No, it's more about the fact that you've achieved that qualification. Would you recommend doing LM3 at cert level, or is it better to do something else? I'd say where you're in claims, I4 might be a good one to do for claims, because LM3 is a lot more focused on wordings and business planning and sort of specific run-ins of the London market. So for your job role to get up and running, I think you'll probably find that benefit from doing claims. If you were in underwriting, or another area of the business that didn't have a module so closely aligned, I'd say yes, yeah, LM3 is quite an obvious choice. But where you are doing a role that's married up to another module, I'd recommend probably starting with that one.